Everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. And we have another episode going. We have our guest Will today. And what are we going to talk about? We are going to talk about magic thinking. It's going to include deception and oligarchs and the dialectic and the stuff people talk about all the time. But hopefully we have something to add to the conversation. So we're going to start with the idea of the contradiction. I'm going to lay out a little bit of a framework. There's going to be some free-for-all. But before I get into it, what I would like to say is that, I don't really check my Dr. Deep State mail. I'm not even sure exactly how to do it. But from time to time, people figure out how to get through to me. And I really like that. I've met people, Dr. Deep State friends from all over, on all kinds of people. None of them share anything particular in common. At any rate, I'm going to leave my email down below. And if somebody would ever if you want to get a hold of me at any time, reach out, go ahead. Feel free to do so. Will, how are you doing up there in central Kentucky today? I hear the sun is shining.
It was. It's gone back in for now, but it's a little warmer, feeling better, mostly over the cold. So I'm pretty happy here.
Okay. We have a sunny day in deep South Texas. It's actually quite beautiful out, but I'm in the house right now, as you can see. Wow, what are we going to do? It is a rehash of stuff we've been doing all along. And there's something about the dialectic that for some people, they get it. And some people, they just don't. But in some ways, we're not going to be doing too much new here. But I want to reiterate how this sucker works. And I would probably begin here by just the idea of a contradiction. Will, this idea, what do they call that thing there? The swastika. And that's mixed in with what? A star? How does that go? Get us going, Will.
Sure, yeah. That's a news item from this week. Kanye is playing the holy fool up to it again. Got kicked off of the Twitter, even though Elon Musk has made it wide open to all of us free speech folks. Kanye pushed it just a little bit too far by posting an image that's a combination of the star. Some call it the Star of David, some call it the Seal of Solomon, some call it the hexagram. Whatever you know what I'm getting at. Intermixed with swastika, which some researchers, one that our friend Derek has suggested to us, Amazing Polly, pointed out, is actually the logo for a religious cult called the Raelians, who believe in an imminent extraterrestrial second coming, or that the aliens created us and they're coming back to set our civilization straight. And so this wacky cult has recently given an award to Elon Musk. So it's kind of ironic that he's crying foul at this point that Kanye is using this symbol in the midst of all the controversy that he's embroiled in. But it's kind of telling after the Alex Jones conversation, where he made quotes like, "I love Nazis. I love Jews. I'm a Nazi. I'm a Jew. I love Hitler." These kinds of things, accelerating the contradictions. I think that's the term that Lenin gave for the formula for permanent revolution, is accelerate the contradictions until the shells of reality are deconstructed to a point in which something new can be born from their ashes. So it seems like that might be what Kanye's up to here. This kind of chaos alchemy, destroying our perceptions of distinctions and contradictions in the world. I hand it back over to you there, Doug. Did I get kind of what you're? All right.
Yeah, no, great. Well, great. I think a lot of people at this point have a handle on, oligarch money, pushing the world in the direction. We're starting this book in pursuit of the metaverse. One of the central questions is like Vigano from 3 years ago now. It's coming out. There's a great reset. They're here. They're taught. Why do some people see it and some people don't? It's still kind of a mystery. These are the people. This is what they're saying. But yet there's apologists saying, why are you looking at that? And we'll get to that in a moment. Okay, so one place we probably won't go too much is sitting there and guessing, was the Kanye thing real? Or was the Kyrie thing real? The moments are just riddled with contradictions and intercontradictions. I sense that occasionally there's kinks in the matrix and people say more than they should or less than they should, and we just don't know. But we're going to kind of look at the bigger direction of what's going on with these just flagrant contradictions. In short, let's keep it simple. It causes cognitive dissonance. So the mind is trying to figure it out. Black guy loves Hitler, woo, woo, woo. And that's where the oligarchs push the message. It's pushing on the ethereal message or the ethereal forces in the world toward a certain direction. And before I go too further, what is that direction? I think a lot of people get that. And even a lot of armchair people are watching the WEF and they get it. Transhumanism, all of this stuff. But there's just not many people that get the simple, plain direction of all this. And so because I'm a small site, I promised I'd stick around so I could do stuff like this, and I can ankle bite at the people right above me. In the book of Revelation, and a lot of people have heard about this, the whole world is deceived from their sorcery. And, you can further go into that, and they lacked the love of the truth, which I think stands above all of these things, is the love of the truth. And so over the last 3 years, the common thing was, sorcery means pharmakia or pharmacy or big pharma, and they're pulling off this mass thing. Yeah, that's part of it, no doubt. But the old-fashioned message is just as good. It's sorcery. It's the sorcerer's circle. It's the dialectic. So how many videos have you seen with me with the snake eating its tail, the sorcerer's circle? So I think we had a glitch there. Revelation, I think there's also a straightforward way to approach the idea of they were all deceived from the sorcery, which is the sorcery of the snake. This is the snake moving through history. There's a redemption story of history. What makes the redemption story possible? It's the redemption from the snake's grasp on all of us, our minds, our souls, our bodies, and so forth. So the snake biting its own tail is the Ouroboros. That is the sorcerer's circle, the dialectic that from time immemorial till now, people get entrapped into. So we want to think about techniques to kind of be aware of it and to sort of have a perspective on it, because I think knowing about it has a certain set of pitfalls also. So let me just wind this up with the question, what is the dialectic? Why are there so few people that can simply state what the two sides of the dialectic pulling at us? When we watch the nightly news, when we watch podcasts, why do so few people get something that's quite plain? Well, I think in part they just get what's the destination of the snake wrong, even though it couldn't be more clear. Where is this going? I've always been puzzled, even when Will gets it. Hey, Will, can you help me out here? Will gets it, but some people just, you just say it. in a straightforward biblical way, and it's just lost on them. And that's where the egregore comes in. It's these mind blockages. So we'll get into that. That's the sorcery. You get blocked into it. You can call it a myoscopic paradigm or whatever, but people get blocked into it. And that's kind of this ethereal force around certain ideas. But Will, do you get the dialectic? Well, I know you get the dialectic, Will. What do you think?
I think I do. Yeah, I guess maybe an example would be, we hear the common refrain of, it's the globalists. We've got to fight the globalists. And but already we're kind of inside the circle when we imagine that there's this, international cabal that's trying to create a totalitarian one world system. That's true. But it presupposes that there is a seed of a nationalistic, we the people principle that's in contradiction to that globalist collective identity. So the dialectic advances by the tension that's created between these two different perspectives. So, and I think where you're going is we're going to talk about, the esoteric eschatology that was laid out in, vivid detail through the Dr. Deep State course. That is, the Hermetic Kabbalah that's leading toward a Moshiach, a third temple, and the techno serpent, as we might call it. So the dialectic operates based upon opposition, tension, and negation. So destroying what is. Its one purpose is to destroy, to be able to create something new from the mess that's born out of the destruction. So we have this idea that there's thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and that's true. But the praxis of the dialectic is more so just in negating what is, so that it can open it up into something new, and that the vessels of reality can be shattered, so that a spark of the divine can be extracted out of it and collected into this great work. Did I get close?
Yeah, no. One thing you said that I liked, to critique what is, and that is pure being. And that's the only check upon this snake, is the I am. And ultimately, everything has to be criticized. And this is where the endless dialectic, and we can talk about identity because that's closely tied to the identity with the capital B being. But everything has to be critiqued, and including all identity ad infinitum. Supposedly, it's going to this endpoint. And here's the important thing about this new kingdom, this new order designed for the special people. And of course, when Christ arrived, that's what they thought he was going to do, bring an earthly kingdom. So after 70 AD, the project started over under an assumed name, which is to build and prepare this temple. So part of the idea with the end game of this, and when I used to drive around in my car and make these videos, one of the things, and it's the fueling source of these ethereal energies, is these prophecies, from places like Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah. And in short, they're describing a world that's completely different than this fallen state. Kids lying down with cobras and lambs lying down with the wolves, people, trading in their guns for, this is not something that's going to happen in a fallen world. We believe as, Christians, this is the fallen world. Men have never evolved. It's the restrictions. It's the barrier on being. So what they're hoping for is a great leap of being, so that you can be almost live forever, right? It's the inversion. It's a man-made version from the Garden of Eden, that you get to define good and bad, and you can make it possible. So we glitch out day. So the end of this project requires this huge leap in being. One of the ways you could do it, as Harari will say, we have reached the precipice of history. We have the technology. We can build not just the $6 million man, Can you imagine $6 million? Doesn't sound like a lot of money in 2022. We can do it. And that's the magic thinking, to think you can get on board and make a leap of being. We can trace this all the way back to the Puritans and the Reformation into the modern day progressives. It's a type of Gnostic thinking that has been captured by magical thinking. And so part of that magical thinking and the great leap in being can create, and it starts with double-mindedness, it can create a type of trap. But before I get to the trap, which is the Gnostic trap, let's talk a little bit about the dialectic and what's playing out in our world today. Do we have a little bit of time, Will?
Yeah, we got all the time you need, Doug.
Okay. So here it is. From the beginning, the dialectic at the international level is pretty simple today. Communism at one hand, and what we used to call fascism. And, I've taken political science classes up the yin yang, and they put these on the other side of the continuum. But if you're in the know, you realize they're a type of opposition, but the real opposition, what we've refaced fascism or Nazism, is today we call it Zionism. Okay, so we can talk about, on the one hand, it's easy to criticize. The same people that created communism went over there and they bashed themselves in order to have the and there's layering. Like when we go into World War II, I don't want to do that right now. There's characters that are riddled with this contradiction. Some people, that were Nazis went on to run international space agencies and the United Nations administrations. Others were executed. It's a mixed bag. There's some contradictions there with the whole story and in each individual's. So when you get to a Kanye and a Hitler, both are riddled with contradictions that when you go in, you will be opened to this magical thinking and the oligarchs' agenda without realizing it. So the world is filled with proxy warriors, usually that have sold part of their identity over to this thrust. These ethereal beings are directed by a force and they know where they're going, which is ultimately an illusion. The snake doesn't bite its tail. That's the idea of the singularity. It's a hype. If they unlock the secret, let's watch the billionaires live for 200 years. Where's the magic at? So it is something where the circle is kind of going down with a continuous contradiction. Before I hand it over to Will, this is what the deep state is. And this is the problem with so many people out there, that it's Soros, it's the left, the left, the left. That's the most dangerous thing in the world. Deep state actors push both of them all the time. I've seen the same crisis thespians out there being involved in one and then the opposite over here. They're pushing this thing in the same direction. So if you took the sides of this, what would you get between the two, communism and Zionism? You would get one of two things. It's a world government without borders or a federated world government. What could be more properly administered? Should we go more incrementally and let people hold on to some of their ethnic or personal identities that they've gathered through self-critique? And so that's what is going on. But why you see the differences in news agencies around the world why there appears to be some kind of differences in the play is simply that. That's where you're going to get right now what's going on in Florida. Looks appealing. It is appealing. But very few people can't go that direction, because if you critique just communism, you can make a website, you can make a platform. And I'll just pick a name real quick right now. He's getting it from all directions. Poor Taylor Marshall. He's a rad trad podcaster. He's pretty popular. And I just heard him yesterday saying, how do we respond? There's great people like DeSantis, and he could be the next president. And we just have to remember we're Judeo-Christians. Should be a lot of red flags going up there. Judeo-Christians, and we're neoconservatives. And that's I mean, that's as pernicious as the woke freaks in a different way. It's pushing you toward that. So if those people whose bridges I seem to be burning all the time, they're potentially going to listen. Let me plug my book. If they're pushing it, they're an extremely, and ears close when you do this. Ears closed, when you do this. There used to be a movement against Zionism 20, 30 years ago from the left. They have been detoothed entirely. They are now pro-big pharma, pro-military industrial complex, just bathed in identity politics and nothing else. So there is no resistance from this half of the equation. And here's the thing with Zionism. It is the antithesis of Catholicism. Catholicism is the last bastion in the world that's going to hold to this amillennial eschatology. Almost all Protestants have sold out from it, and that is that our purpose here between the kingdom of man and the kingdom of heaven is to be situated in this type of medicacy, this uncomfortable thing, always the assumption we're working toward the kingdom of heaven and balancing this. So anytime you get swept away in this idea that man has to participate in history for this great rising, this sunny day, this sunny century, this sunny millennium, it's a millennial thinking that's 5,000 years old at least. And people get sucked away into this egregore wanting to participate in history. And so the last benchmark, and I'll go over this, is the traditional Catholic order is all about institutionalizing the amillennial belief system into our minds and bodies and society. That's why that is the last restrainer, I believe. I agree with Vigano on that. That's the balance between the state and the church that was intricately and delicately balanced since Augustine. And as Vigano, I think, well pointed out, Cardinal Ratzinger, his dissertation from way back when, surfaced in Vatican II, the last vestige cutting off the visible church from the world as overseeing it in terms of its view of morality through the millennial kingdom, is about to be shattered. That's the front target of the Synod on Synodality, is to break it so the whole church becomes mystical, ethereal. And personally, I don't have a problem. I think everybody should have, if the Lord's speaking to you and the grace is coming to you, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, whatever your denomination. That's a starting point. But if you have no structure left of a visible church, I see that as being the best description of what the restrainer will be before there is the great chastisement. And I can talk about that in a moment, and juxtaposing the great reset with the great chastisement. And I think these things are not paralleled by coincidence. As Thomberg brilliantly pointed out, as the Hebrews, well, especially Moses, was up on the hill receiving from God the 10 commandments at that exact moment, because that's kind of how this time prison works. At that exact moment, the people were down melting their gold to make an idol. And we see these two things always situated throughout redemption history as being at a supernatural level coming up on the other side of the coin. Well, let me throw it back to you. I've talked quite a bit.
Yeah, great. A lot of great stuff there. It brings to mind this issue that the Marxists call the problem of reproducibility. So there's this ground of being, and Christ has unified the eternal forms and as the eternal logos. So if people are left to their own devices, they're going to naturally gravitate toward tradition, to raising their children the way that they were raised, raising them in the faith that they were brought up in seeking peace and economic stability, and having a stable, reproducible world. Because the Marxists, the Gnostics, the Kabbalists are at war with the world that is the transcendent ground of being, they have to destroy this process of reproducibility. One of the beautiful things about being a Catholic is how it resolves issues of the individual and the person. So as, before I converted, I was always kind of plagued with these thoughts of, who am I as an artist? Who am I as a father? Who am I as a husband, as a son? All these sort of roles and vocations in my life, I was constantly poring over and, entering into the dialectic of what am I not? What am I to be? And it's amazing how by uniting the individual to the form in Catholicism in the form of a vocation, we are set at peace with ourselves. So it's like entering into the chain of being, or the mystical body of Christ. We're no longer having to ponder and negate these categories. We just kind of have to accept things as they are. So, likewise with this amillennial view of how things are, whenever you direct your consciousness toward the supernatural, toward the eternal and the transcendent, it simplifies the conflicts that are in your life. So these contradictions that are resolved by the blueprint that the faith gives us, they have to be complicated, or we have to be interrupted from them, because if we're left to our own devices, we're going to just teach our children in the same faith that we were brought up in. So part of the purpose of the dialectic is to get us into this linear digression of thinking and perceiving the world as being disconnected and broken and having to be repaired. So this tikkun olam process of bringing the world back together and reconstructing it in our own image, rather than it already being resolved in the image of Christ through his sacrifice on Calvary. I'll hand it back over to you there.
Yeah, I mean, that what pops into my head there. We have the mystical body of Christ, the inversion of that as the Adam Kadmon, and that's what's being created, and that's bringing the gold, the sparks back to create this antithesis. So it's moving in that direction. The physical parts of this would have to do with biblical prophecy that we're all aware of. So let me do this. Liberalism, classic liberalism. This is the air that we've breathed our whole lives. So what is this? It's, comes in the modern age. It comes from the Enlightenment. It's fused itself with capitalism. Francis Fukuyama wrote a book after the quote unquote fall of the Soviet Union. So I don't know what that was, 30 years ago. And it was called The End of History. He's taken this Hegelian idea that God is immanentized in history, moves through the history into the state, and is realized into the state. That's kind of been transmorphed into a sort of special group of people who represent the state at any point. I believe that liberalism, he had this idea that it's over because the Soviets had become liberal. The whole world it's the most perfect system in the world. And basically it's almost like it's millennial age in and of itself. And the champions of Americans for a New American Century that were writing this around 1998, just took this as a given, that America is going to become an even vaster and more mighty empire than ever before. These are the neocons. So, and Fukuyama was a neocon. I mean, he's literally signed up to this. But when we reflect now on the date that we've had, and I knew this from the beginning of Dr. Deep State, but I only can say with utter certainty right now, liberalism is over as a project. And we see that in the world today. And I can continue a critique of it, but it's founded on this idea of sovereignty of the people, which means a political system that's going to cater to the passions of the people. This would be juxtaposed to the system that they crashed, which was a system based on the sovereignty of Christ, or a Christ kingship, or a confessional state. And so that, I'm going to argue, is the only solution. How I propose to think about this, so once you recognize this dialectic, what does Zionism look like? What does communism look like? How do you, in a dialogue or a discourse, how do you recognize it and what do you do about it? Well, I can propose a political party, but at the end of the day, the only thing that's workable, I believe, is going forward, not going backwards, getting locked in a piece of time or that mindset or being a rigid trad or something like that. But it's using the systems that we have in the church and in the state, using the best of modernism and the best that we do have left of the sovereignty of the people and moving in that direction. So as I'm talking about getting out of the dialectics, this is the state of mind I'm moving for. It's tried and true. It's the system that was destroyed. But my belief is until you find some sovereign territory that's dedicated to building the kingship of Christ and that the rights of God come before the rights of man, until we have that firm foundation, the world is just, it's kind of, it's going to go the direction it is. And I think that's inevitable anyway. I'm just saying, this is the Now, that's not even a uniquely Catholic position. Rushdoony, in a book that kind of made me Catholic in a sense would be, I really liked the book, and he's an interesting thinker. He's a Calvinist, and the book I'm referring to would be Conspiracy in Philadelphia. And I don't want to go way into it, but he realized in 1776, America in a Protestant Calvinist, mostly Calvinist way, there was great debates. Again, the great reformer John Edwards said that Calvin's God is my demon. Really, in the roots of America, you had people that literally, that's the difficulty with the Protestant project. It was supposed to go back to the beginning and do it all over right and build a kingship of Christ for Protestants. But it gets tricky because early on, you realize there's not the unity there that you might guess once you kind of move past, hey, we're all just reading from the Bible. So there's this deep tension, and the Calvinists have always kind of wanted to have the upper hand. So in his book, Conspiracy in Philadelphia, he's saying between 1776, it was a system or a declaration really based, however vaguely, on the rights of man that would come through natural law, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and property. John Locke. Rather than Jefferson's pursuit of happiness. Can you get more vague? That's where things really get screwed up. Pursuit of happiness. That's just, it's all about me. It's on a direction toward atomized individuals. It's where we're at, right? So he says, and I picked up on this in my own studies. Between 1776 and 1789, there was a conspiracy, and it was to remove from all the different states, the colonies, oaths to really essentially create the political project for God first. And that was taken out by Hamilton and it's a cabal. He took it out. So he secularized the American project between 1776 and 1789. Christian Reconstructionists, those Calvinists, who I would say if they had to represent Protestants, they are probably the smartest people, and they got this part right. But they want to turn the world over to the God of Calvin. And that's where I said, you know what? The God of Calvin is the one that made a whole dialectic using I can go into this. From the beginning, the Puritans based their dialectic on an utter destruction of the Catholic Church. That's a historical memory from 1500 years that would just be disappeared and subsumed into the Calvinist project, and ultimately the American Empire, which would become the American Progressive, both in terms of empire building and in terms of woke culture. You get it both. You get both, because it's not grounded in the rights of God first. And I can go on that a little bit, but before I hand it over to Will, what I'll mention at this point, if you were going to make a political party, it would be a tough go. If the world, if things fell apart and people had an opportunity to rebuild, there's only one political party that would work. And people don't like to hear this because it's just, here's what it would have to be. the political party would have to be first and foremost trying to find some sense. I'd say it's an international project. Anybody that can find a place to have some sovereignty so that like-minded people could commit the political project to the rights of God first. Or it would be a confessional state is another way of saying that, or Christ the King. And there's still a few of these around. Ireland had it up until a few years ago. This is what Father Fahey is constantly talking about. This is the eroding foundation of Western civilization. And the secularization and the separation of church and state and that whole thing, because it's just a road to perpetual integration, falling into the sorcerer's circle, falling into the dialectic until it's in the ashes, and they're waiting for a phoenix to come out, and that great leap of being, which would probably be, unless you find a supernatural agent like a Mashiach, there's no way you're going to get from our fallen state to, it requires magical thinking. So I'm getting all over the place. What is the political party? The political party would have to be based on the kingship of Christ, number one. Number two, it would have to be anti-communist. Number two, it'd have to be anti-Zionist. And number three, of course, as everybody likes to say, the stone cutters, like they came from nowhere. Okay, so it'd have to be anti-Zionist. Does that mean it's going to create a perfect world? No, you just don't have a chance in the future living a decent life. There really is this program to essentially create the world, or to move the world in a post-human direction. Ultimately, they do want humans to be, they want it to, however it's going to happen, they don't, their vision is to eliminate humanity. There might be, as Charles Darwin III, was it Leonard Darwin? That was the great, no, just the grandson of Charles Darwin, wrote a book in mid-century, and he'd say, you know, that the people at the top might have to be wild animals, so they might not take the download, they might not fuse with the machines, they probably won't take their boosters, you know, so you might need some wild people at top, but everybody else, it's this age-old merger that comes with the natural outcome of liberalism. The grandfather of economics, Adam Smith, saw it from the beginning. He was a supporter of it, but he said, each and every decade, man will become more like machines, and machines will become more like man. He saw the transhumanism from the get-go. That's the liberal project. And when you're really, this is kind of loaded, you know, if we grew up with this language our whole life, but it really is sort of demonic, because the outcome of essentially, you get into a dialectic that is going to destroy, as Marx would say, everything that's made must be destroyed. So I'll hand it out to you. Now, obviously, a political party like that would have trouble. The one sort of positive note is that it has a pedigree. It has a 1900-year-old pedigree, because the Catholic Church realizes to preserve the amillennial kingdom, the kingdom that is, the millennial age that we have, the enemy of that kingdom is Zionism. Zionism needs to utterly erase any concept, any historical consciousness of that millennial kingdom. So they've done it virtually with the whole Protestant tradition. The only people that, that even stand for it anymore, unless you press some theologians here or there, it's still on the books, part of the Missouri Synod manifesto from 1989. And it's kind of just vaporizing in people's minds. So it just leaves this pocket, this vacuum that is, instead of these fixed eternal forms, you're getting into the ethereal area. And that is where the oligarchs just push this promise of a millennial age. And we can all use our own group identity because they can cater to it. What will you do in this? And it's so deep. A lot of times you'll hear within Protestantism, people that can kind of call this out. For example, Chuck Baldwin can call this out. I don't think he described, but he can call out Zionism. But he'll call it Darby Darwin, Darby futurism. And Darby was a big character. He was taken, extracted for his own use, and they threw him into, the Dallas Seminary and these kind of things to kind of promote him and those ideas. But the idea is several hundred years older. It was there from the get-go. And it was fueled by a dialectic that it would only work this Christian millennial age, what we call premillennialism, or what became also postmillennialism. It's predicated on the utter destruction of the Catholic Church. So it's purely Zionistic with their own identity. Early on, they thought they'd have the upper hand of the special people, but now it's all too clear. They're just all too happy to have the lower hand, and just, and they don't have a hermeneutic of reading the old through the new. So they look at things, whoever blesses the special people will be blessed. And that old thing, that is 500 years old. They've been putting that little seed to create this egregore all along. Will, help me out here. I've been talking a lot.
Yeah. And yeah, you mentioned the stonecutters, the Freemasonic arm or column of this conspiracy, and what stands in the way of the social kingship of Christ. So a lot of things that I want to add there. You're talking about, is it Fukushima? Is that the end of history, that concept? And you can look at the prophecy, quote unquote, by Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion that was quoted in Life magazine, I think in the late 50s or early 60s, that predicted the convergence of, at the end of the Cold War, of a Soviet Union that had open markets, and a Western European American economy that was planned top-down, technocratic, and these things would increasingly work in lockstep with one another. Likewise, what Doug's describing with the Darby futurism, as Chuck Baldwin calls it, you can go back to the early 1600s and find a document written under a Christian alias by Manasseh ben Israel that basically lays out the blueprint for Christian Zionism and this millennial age, the world to come, the role of the British Empire in fostering the return of the Jews to Palestine, and how that will trigger the apocalypse and this great age and second coming of the Messiah. And he's writing it under a pen name as a political apologetic to allow the Jews to return to England. And so you have traditional Catholics who should be on the side, who should have the memory of why the Christendom had certain policies toward the Jews, and Jewish incursion into their political systems, and why those things were in place. And they're sitting here and pretending like that never existed, or that's not the thing that's actually driving us toward apocalypse and the erosion of Western civilization, when you have people like the ones we've just aforementioned stating that that's the case. So you've mentioned, Doug, in your previous videos on just to go a little bit deeper into the dialectic, Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank, and this messianic principle of redemption through sin. It's also called antinomianism, and that's another classic example of how the dialectic works, by destroying the premises of civilization through doing the opposite of what's beautiful, virtuous, and good. We can bring about a new age, a new era, a new set of standards and rules for how society can operate. And this is based on this idea that there was a primordial chaos, a oneness that existed at the beginning that was broken apart, and through fostering the primordial chaos, we can reconnect again back to that oneness at the end of time. And I think that's kind of what's being suggested by Fukushima, David Ben-Gurion, as hey, here we are at the end of history, and the Cold War was kind of the structure that was funneling us into this moment that we're in. And now we have this kind of free fall of interior dialectics and infinite critique of self, and individuation of am I a trans person? Am I what are these different layers of self that people can be obsessed with, that disconnect them from their calling. So, something that we might talk about with these issues around identity is like what it means within the mystical body of Christ to be a person or a member within that body, as opposed to an atomized individual within, a circular economy, for instance, and how an individual is defined by what they're not. So this process of individuation is like constantly self-critiquing. I'm not like this, I'm not like that. And so you're kind of always in this self-referential process of imagining who I am and what I'm to be. What are my goals? Where should I be at this point in my life? But there's this sense within like accepting your vocation within the mystical body of Christ is I am who God says that has chosen me to be. I have to just simply wake up each day and fulfill the duties that have been given to me, and do what's commanded me. Love God with my whole heart and strength and mind, and love my neighbor as myself. And then I don't have to worry, so much, and how that simplifies our consciousness, and we're not so vulnerable to the dialectic in that sense. I hand it back over to you.
Yeah, nice. So, okay, let me do this. So there are people out there, I knew them in the Protestant world, that saw this dialectic between communism and Zionism and how they're both moving us in the same direction. And you can build whole sites, again, just bashing one side of it because it seems positive. If we could just, and here's the thing right now with the people that represent with the Zionist force, enough with the wokeness, let's get back to the family. There's a lot of truth there, but the dialectic is always going to take you down if you don't recognize it. It's just grounded on the passions of the people. And I'm surprised it's lasted this long. But at any rate, we can get people that kind of are even in the Protestant world starting to recognize that this whole order of things, the liberal order, is problematic. So what I think happens is when people, I'll call conspiracy people that are good at pattern recognition, okay? And they can see these patterns and alert people. What starts to happen is it's everywhere, especially in the media. It's everywhere, from the main television down to the smallest platform. So it's only the people at the smallest. And here's the problem. Once you see it, you can identify it. Now you're in a conspiracy, i.e. a certain type of Gnostic thing. And I'm not pointing fingers. We need to have people with pattern recognition, because that's what they're trying to destroy. Even with the use of the word conspiracy, trying to destroy that pattern recognition. We need that. But the pitfall of that is that the trap of it is that you look at all the institutions in the world, they're rotten to the core. All of the leaders of our world are rotten to the core. That's why I celebrate Vigano for who he is. I don't see anybody else calling this out at all. I have a few little problems with Vigano. I can get back to that. So everything is rotten. Everything is, there's another layer to everything. And there probably is. I don't know. But here's the problem. It gets to a kind of thinking where nobody's up to snuff to kind of take things as they are. I think the problem is, and it's where Will was going with this whole thing, with the Protestant Reformation, with sola scriptura and sola fide, what you have is a hugely reductionistic, ahistorical look at the world. It's what modern economists use. It's cutting off that whole historical consciousness that we were meant to inherit. That's our inheritance. So my problem with it is that you are going to be your own mediator of everything. And so you submit yourself to the word of God, but there's so many variations of that. You can be forgiven for sin, but there's no objective standard for that. Some things are kind of obvious, and there's just no exception. So what you hear among Protestants, YouTubers a lot, is things like Catholicism. It's just mediation. It's this whole thing to keep you down, control, mechanism. So, I mean, you can be, 3 days into wokeness and figure out the Catholic Church is pretty sketchy looking, right? But they can't, that's where the pride comes in. I'm sorry, I don't want to be pointing fingers. I found myself, this is how I came out of it. I was my own pope. I was my own king. I decided what I liked and didn't like about scripture. So what that kind of Gnostic trutherism does, I'm trying to be delicate, everybody I knew in my world, right? Everybody, this is my whole world. So I'm not trying to isolate people. I believe that God gave us a mediation between him and man, things that are physical here and there, and people as mediators between us and him. Can we have a direct relationship? Yes, we can. But without this mediation, we're part of this atomized structure of things going up in any direction. Christ willed for unity. And what that causes is a submission. Some people think just submitting to the word of God is fine. It takes more. That's what this restrainer is. There's going to be nobody left submitting to this historical consciousness and the teaching of the church. And so, not to bang the drum about Catholicism, but when I started to see what's the standard, that everything that the Protestants built was a rejection and a desire to utterly, you don't see it as much in the 20th century, but it's there from the beginning and with the reformers, an utter obliteration of the church. It's part of the dialectic. It's going to go into, it'll be, until Catholicism is absolutely killed in people's minds and consciousness, our project cannot truly work out as a one unified, that's the hope of Calvinism, to be that one unifying force. So the mediation, what I found when I looked at this is the teachings of the Catholic Church. If you ever go through the process, it takes almost a year. What you submit to is the teachings of the Catholic Church. That's what I did on Easter. And what was awakening to me when I looked at the catechism is how could this thing, with the chaos that is the church, with the corruption that's always been the church, how did they manage to preserve the delicate balancing that every other group goes one way or another? Until the Protestant Reformation, all the Gnostic groups didn't get the Trinity and the nature of Christ, fully man, fully spirit, because people would want to take it all the way spirit, Gnostic, all the way physical, reductionist down to materialism. And how do you hold that together? Well, the great reformers did hang on to those, and that's why Vatican II recognizes these as separated brethren. Is because they did hold that balance, but it's very precarious within Protestantism. And usually it shoots off into Jehovah's and Mormons and space cults or whatever else. So the Catholic Church, what's left at it, has maintained these teachings. Again, the hermeneutic of continuity is really sketchy with Vatican II over the last 50 years, but it's still there. And it's an absolute only through the grace of God because these teachings have survived. And so you submit to those teachings. I didn't submit to the Pope. It is part of Catholicism. Catholicism is all about the Pope. So that's where I'm going to get right now is, okay, so liberalism is problematic. You're going to hear about it each and every, I hear it basically every time I listen to a podcast. More and more people are popping out saying, this is done. Liberalism's done in this class. So how are we going to reinvent this? And again, the best integralists, those are Catholic integralists, use what we got, use democracy to the extent we can, use the church teachings, including Vatican II as much as we can, but we gotta pull so much of the past and we can't do anything unless we get the foundation right. So mediation, I believe that this mediated and our submission to this mediation is the project that's necessary. Otherwise, it's just, this is what the anti-federalists recognized from the beginning of the American project, that this consolidation into the federal power it'll be a consolidation into the international power controlled by the oligarchs. You can just read it in the anti-federalists from the get-go before the Constitution. It's just going to be a world of separated, isolated individuals who become their own popes and their own kings. So our project that Will and I are doing here, at least with these casts, it begins in the mind first. You have to submit to an earthly authority. Now, here's the question. So on one hand, we got liberalism. In the middle, you have historical Catholicism that successfully put a check on the oligarchs. And not through something that, there was evolution in the faith, but it was there from the beginning. Now you have the Pope at the other hand. The popes, it wasn't in Martin Luther's time. For 500 years, like or hate the popes, they were there to protect the deposit of faith against these oligarchical intrusions, invasions from within, from outside, from everywhere. So they've been there. So they protected it, but it started dropping off incrementally. It's getting lower and lower and lower. And we're at the point right now, I'm not even going to bother making a case. This is a new world order Pope that's at the service of both the forces of Zionism and communism and won't stand up for the faith. I didn't like having my meltdown last week, but I'm trying to break the code a little bit and trying to be real a little bit until we recognize it. So what do? There's not many options left until we recognize Zionism as the key ingredient in this dialectic to bring us to this world of the special people's world order by them. And it's going to be totalitarianism on steroids. This is not going to be good. All the promises, and there might be a phase for quite a while of a Huxley's, we love our servitude, we love our porno, we love our marijuana. That might go on, I don't know, but eventually, and frankly, I think that sounds like hell anyway. Eventually, so this is the truth I have. I think the greatest truth is that the true, the beautiful, and the good, we, through our own natures, all of us can ascertain in this fallen state, and this is the problem of the critique upon the critique. When they stare at the good, the beautiful, and the true, they're going to stare at it until they find a contradiction. Because in the fallen state of man, you can always say, what kind of God would create a place like this? So they're going to take something beautiful and break it and break it and break it until we reclaim our love for the truth, beauty, and God Almighty that represents all of these forms, and that we can have a personal relationship with these perfections through Christ. He made that promise. And it begins there first and foremost. Before, I'm not trying to do a sales job with most of you on Catholicism. This is my story. And so that's the only thing left. I believe this is the restrainer in the world. I totally agree with Vigano. Vigano thinks the state of the Roman Catholic Church is so bad, he's looking to Eastern Orthodoxy as possibly the last restrainer. I still think that there's chance for it. Before I hand it over to Will, I would like to talk for a moment about the great chastisement, because I see that as somewhat inevitable. But what do we do with that? So in between the Pope and liberalism, all we have left is tradition, and to capture that historical consciousness. When I came into the church, it's mind-blowing. I'm coming into an individual church, but at the same time, this is a church that's 2,000 years old. And when you come in with that attitude, it's you're entering something that's just so vast that it would take you a lifetime just to kind of grasp the magnitude of what you've just become a part of. So it's something so extraordinary, so beautiful. And to be able to submit the beauty and the freedom in submission. And that's what's just not part of our discourse, right? Just true submission. And there's a lot of challenges, and most of them, the problem with Gnosticism is you can see everybody else is, the world's not well ordered. If only I were in charge, I could order it. I can see everybody else's problem. But until you can submit to an objective standard, which has been laid out for 2,000 years and can even give you the ability to call the Pope, a member of a criminal cabal, that's the last best thing left. And very few Protestants had even heard of this Christian Reconstructionist, but it's funneled down. So to the extent there's a little totter over the next, because we can talk about this, they're feeding the right now. DeSantis is having his trials in Florida. He's going to hold people accountable. It's going to be out there. So at least 40% of the viewing public's going to start getting some of this information, will automatically be given a leader for this organization. And it's going to try to it's going to try to balance out all the craziness. In my own opinion, I don't want to be around these crazy people anymore. I'm getting off. When I look at the level of the sickness that's just come in just a few years, they're not going to go away. Even if they were bombarded, if the right took over the media and just, it's there, that poison's in their head. It's that licentious. I mean, I think that they're probably going to arrange some red blue thing, at least here in this country. But it's the body politic, or you could call it the mystical body, has been so poisoned that there's very few alternatives left. And the idea of this political agenda that dares to say anti-communism and anti-Zionism, it's just a killer. You could say anti-Zionism 20 years ago, the left would do it, for the sake of the Palestinians or from the military-industrial complex. It's being equaled now. Anti-Zionism equals anti-special people, and anti-porn equals anti-special people, and anti-banker equals anti-special people, and anti-woke equals, And I'm going to let you go here, Will, but that political platform is the only thing that can kind of work, because unless you see that dialectic, you're just going to be subsumed. That is the sorcery, I believe, that's being talked about, maybe pharmakia too, but it's the sorcery of the snake that's always been at play. Will, go ahead.
Yeah, and that serpentine dialectic, magic thinking, as you've called it, is so ingrained into our political consciousness that it's not going to be so easy to just put boots in the ground, get out the megaphones, and start, pounding the pavement, and we're gonna turn this sucker.
Well, yeah, I want to just jump in. If it's a Catholic movement and the Catholics with any voice have basically sold out to Zionism, what's it going to be? Me and you starting a movement? Well, I don't know how. Until there's some consciousness for it, it's just an idea. But I'm saying, and I felt like this from the beginning, I'd heard this before I even started Deep State videos, that until you can articulate that, you're just going to get the same old. It's moving in a very predictable direction. How these dialectic has always moved downward. Sorry, Will, go ahead.
So in the traditional community, the common strategy that people are coming to is that, well, the super PACs and the funding on the national level, it's just too immense. We can't really think about having an impact. So we just need to focus on local elections, go to city council meetings, get involved with your local election of your sheriff or your magistrate or whatever. And I still think, we need to get more granular in our focus. I feel like even then, unless you have an awareness like what you're describing, Doug, of the dialectic between Zionism and communism, you're not going to be able to perceive the threat of the Chabad house that's already in your community, that's already paved all of those connections with your council members and has lighting the menorah in the town square next week. And you're not going to know how they're sabotaging you before you ever even get started. They have tactics and they have no scruples. And, they're connected with the lodge, which is also in your town. And until you can see that interconnection and the eschatology that's driving those organizations, you're going to be blindsided, and you're going to be in the same boat that you're already in, looking at the national level. So one of the things that really connected with me, Doug, in watching your videos in the past, I can't remember which one it was in. You were saying if you want to change the world, if you want to make a political difference, first of all, get it right up here, get it right in your mind and how you imagine the world in front of you. So, I think that's one of the promises offered by this worldview of, Platonic realism, the Catholic tradition, is that if we unite our consciousness to the transcendent and we try to enact those principles in our daily life, then we're already participating in a political act. And, by teaching our children and by, going to mass and doing the things that are automatic and easy and, don't require a lot of thought, it all automatically builds a defense against, this dialectical method that's trying to capture us within the sorcerer circle. So, having proper expectations for political goals and political speech, understanding that there's not just a political platform or a public forum out there that's not already tainted and corrupted, that we're going to be able to just step into and share our views without being shouted down or canceled. It doesn't work that way any longer. So uniting our consciousness to things that are eternal and then sharing those with others and kind of doing, I think, what we're doing here and with friends in our communities and our parishes, looking for economic and social opportunities within our parishes, and being just generally a good person and doing unto others as they would do unto you. I think that's one of the only paths that we see out of this, and praying for supernatural help. But I think the boomer mentality that we're just going to vote harder and we're going to get out there and protest and be in the public square, it never takes into account social engineering methods, crisis actors, astroturf, these methods that have been in place all along to steer consciousness in a certain direction. And
yeah, I mean, the reality of this, I frankly can't see outside of a supernatural hand how anything's going to move in any direction without utter destruction. I just don't. But this would have to be the way. I think one thing you could do, I mean, when things get worse, you have to almost like a reservation, just declare some spot in whatever country that you just want to be left alone. And hopefully you can appeal to international institutions of law and human rights to be treated at least, because once you have that platform, they want to eliminate you. So you'd almost give me at least the rights that the Palestinians have of just preservation, self-preservation, and self-identity, and that the international courts recognize as basic human rights. So again, the state of exception, if we're living in this time, I argue that we are, both politically and within the church. There is some permission given that the Pope doesn't have the right to extinguish the Latin Mass. If he does, we're going underground. We're not going to be wondering about the graces coming from the legal structure anymore, because he doesn't have the right to do that. That's part of, and that's what Bishop Snyder said. We have to kind of use this state of opportunity to think fresh again. And so if we have to have the Latin Mass in our own communities, we have to treat our own turf as an understanding that God's rights come before ours. And maybe with grace, this will work. I see things, again, because of the dialectic, I see a new civil war kind of thing that they might be breaking apart. So if that is another window of opportunity as the world's being sliced up politically, that people could start having this understanding of saying, this is how we do it. We don't want to build on something that's been toasted. Something that I feel is sort of interesting. There are a number of Catholic prophecies that point to a great chastisement. And to me, between this being the final pope, which is also part of prophecy, that gets into almost, these prophecies get into slightly millennial kind of things, but the idea would be there would be 3 days of darkness. And Padre Pio says, if this happens, you'll see some signs. If the crap's coming down from the sky, shut your windows, stay down, don't look out the windows for 3 days. And some people think that there's a lot of indications that this is coming. This would mark a new era. And that's the idea. It wouldn't be the end of the world, but it'd be the beginning of a new era. The population of the earth would be radically diminished, and it would be a fertile soil to start over. And according to these prophecies, the church there'll be enough seeds and enough historical memory, the church will continue doing what it always has done, but with a fresh perspective. And I find those interesting prophecies because when you juxtapose the Great Reset, that's what it is, depopulation, and it's a chastisement. It's the globalism, greenness is just the reverse of this, making you feel guilty and waking up, and is also totalitarian mind control techniques, apologizing for things you didn't do, and on and on. But it's very much the inversion of this great chastisement. I think the timing of that's very curious to me. What can you do with that? I sometimes think, and Will and I talk about this, you can do your little bit, but sometimes you just maybe got to let this sucker go. I'm telling you, this is what I believe needs to be done in the world. You have to, I don't think start entirely over, before there's some time, before the meteorites hit the earth. But this would be the thinking. This is the chastisement, is that God wants you to do it the right way and make sure your politics comport. This is where you kind of get into theonomics at the Protestant level and Christian Reconstruction. But the Pope has to have the upper hand on the king or whatever, and I'm a proponent of democracy. I think it should be a component of any political system. When it's the be all and end all, that's just perverted. Sorry, I've thought about it for a long time. It just is. And the results you get are just what we have. It's just a vehicle for manipulation, the democracy. So that would have to be the grounding for anything I believe that's going to work. If I would steer this as we're kind of maybe closing, to get a little quirky, because maybe people clicked on, because I'm probably going to put one of those Raylene, is it the Raylene cult? Yet another cult. They love creating their cults. They can't just create enough cults. They've thrashed through Protestantism until you can't come up with much else. So, if there is something going on in the world between these cardboard cutouts of the New World Order, and then there's going to be a new conservative movement, and they maybe bump off a few of the people, the general direction of what they're saying is true. And just like, Kanye was playing the role of the court jester, he spoke some truth. And the information's out there for anybody with ears to hear, not from this podcast, but in the world today. You can see them. My issue, and why I kind of just lost it last week, was I'm getting it more and more. These people, I think they come up sometimes with good intentions. And I saw somebody, with a big platform now, and he did the thing like, there's some people that are kind of seeing this great reset and threw the conspiracy thing out. That's really dangerous. You really are allowing the New World Order a foothold. And I think that's just one of the biggest dangers that I have a fear of, is that people don't want to take hard positions right now. So I had a little interruption there. So increasingly, I'm finding complete formats that seem to be dedicated into going after anybody that's doing some pattern recognition. And they're promoting, I think, the egregore of the Catholic Church that's becoming increasingly evident. The real church is there, but inside you have the egregore. and that is the ape of the church that Fulton Sheen famously talked about. And this is going to become clearer and clearer in the days, months, and years ahead, that there's two churches. And for the time being, we can still be in the same visible church, but again, with the state of emergency as it is, it might be increasingly difficult. So the last point, a lot of these people, it's like liberalism. We don't even realize how steeped we are. You know, part of one of the chapters I'm working on, it's really cemented in American culture with Woodrow Wilson and the American project of empire, that the Zionism has been so interplayed with our Protestantism and our role in the world as America. Of course, that's part of the problem right now. I think it's becoming, you know, increasingly clear that our soldiers are defending woke values, and that's not the freedom the world's going to buy anymore. I mean, we've seen enough in our own culture about going over and creating, you know, the military-industrial complex and kind of the worst models of colonialism and extracting other countries' resources in the name of freedom. And I think the average Americans let a lot of that go. We're literally defending these woke values right now. And I think people are kind of, hopefully, especially on the right, getting a little wise to that. So what I have to say about the Pope-splainers, they don't recognize that Catholicism is antithetical to Zionism. Zionism is trying to build a world millennial human project. When you're not calling it out, because you don't realize that project has to destroy you, Catholics and Protestants, or whatever Protestants don't want to go along with this project, because they are staying true to the historical project of Christianity, which is this merger of the heavenly kingdom with the temporal, and that delicate balance between church and state that's been almost obliterated entirely now. So these Pope-splainers that are promoting this type of Zionism, calling anybody that checks it out, you know, this great reset project is to the kilt. It's Zionism, it's fascism, it's communism, it's the whole thing. And you can't just decouple it. It's great to build I can imagine it'd be great to build a platform, because if you can always point out the enemy and there's going to be this visible kind of thing. But once you kind of do this with the dialectic, people shut down. And I think Catholics especially, this is Catholicism. We are committed to 200-year commitment to the heavenly kingdom of Christ, heavenly millennial. We have an inaugurated eschatology. We are new. We have an identity with a foot in the door to this kingdom. Part of our identity is here with responsibilities, and part of it, we live today in this millennial kingdom. Zionism needs to eradicate that root and branch. So, Will, sorry, talked a lot.
No, that's exactly right. A lot of the trads who can point out the World Economic Forum as a communist stronghold, they can't notice at the same time that, you know, the World Jewish Council is basically commandeering the Vatican and setting the stage for unprecedented codification of you know, anti-Semitism laws and special rights given to the Jews, and the Vatican is right there alongside ratifying it. But you know, one way you can see the dialectic at work is being bombarded with contradictory messaging. So, you know, for instance, in the early days of the pandemic, we have, you know, everybody is locked down for 15 days to slow the spread, you know, no contact, 6 feet apart. And then we have videos not leaked out on CNN and elsewhere of nurses bumping and grinding and having the time of their lives, and totally empty hospitals that are supposed to be filled to the brim with bodies piling up. At the same moment that you have Pope Francis meeting at the World Jewish Council, you have Kanye going rogue in DEFCON 3, and you have the Balenciaga scandal, and Kanye's connected with the Balenciaga scandal, even though he's the Christian knight over here who's standing up for the Christian values, and then you have the FTX scandal being unraveled while Zelensky is winning Time Man of the Year, and they're throwing a banquet with the New York Times, and Janet Yellen and Mark Zuckerberg and Sam Bankman-Fried is being celebrated and clapped for, and as though he was just Icarus who got a little too close to the sun. All this mixed messaging that we're being bombarded with, again, to go back to the theme, it's ontological warfare. It's trying to pull the ground of being out from underneath your feet so that you don't know which way to look or which way's up, which way's down, to disorient you. And ultimately, it's about captivating the mind and creating consent, because only when Esau hands over his birthright for the lentils does he consent to the transfer of his his heavenly rights. So we can only hand over our rights through consent. So don't consent. Don't be so disoriented.
That's what I was.
That we're pulled in a direction that ultimately the direction is up. It's toward heaven, and it's due on earth as it is in heaven. That's all that we have to do. And trying to mobilize and militarize that effort toward political goals, and is the way that we're going to hand over our birthright. I'll hand it back to you, Doug. Do you want to close out for us?
Yeah. I was going to say that that's the deal. The system requires your consent. You got to identify the problem and don't consent. This is your birthright. This is your identity. And it's, that's part of the submission to this identity. It's kind of taken care of for you. It's very liberating. I mean, a Catholic identity or identity in Christ, it's very set. But otherwise, it's a shame. And I do see with all the things going on in the world, like I watched a minute of Tucker Carlson, and he's given this is going on in China, and we're about to have nuclear war, and Sam Bankman-Fried's being nominated for Man of the Year with, and yet going into the White House, we have a drag show. And so people are getting wound up. I mean, it's designed to wind us up, and they will provide us with a leader. And so, I don't want to bust people's bubble, but Elon's not on the team of humanity. So they're going to give you some kind of thing. He's going to split the middle between the technocrats and the techno-religion, and he's going to, kind of frame both of them. So, occupy Mars, sit on that. That's the type of leader they're going to provide for you on the right. And I frankly, thought that this right thing would be, it'll be there. It's going to be manufactured. I don't know if they're going to accelerate the contradictions and really get this up there to almost a tyrannical point on the right, because a lot of me kind of thinks at a world level, they'll just do a little bit of synthesis, but I think the project is kind of in place. We'll find out over the next year. The project is kind of in place. I just say, with the consent, that crowd mentality, when the right comes back and you swooped up with that ethereal energy is what you need to protect yourself from. We have everything we could possibly need. There's so many things to be grateful for if you're part of Western civilization that still exists, that we can still hang on to. The true, the beautiful, the good is still there. And one of the beautiful things I will say again about what makes a distinction between most of Protestant theology and the idea of total deprivation, which is an idea introduced by Luther and picked up on Calvin, which is this total, that nature and man are totally devoid, or there's been a total deprivation. You can look around the world, there's beauty left in the world. There's beauty left in individuals, right? And we take that and we work toward the beautiful, toward the good. And there's just a lot to work with. So I don't want to leave with a black pill kind of a cast today. I really just, there's so much to be thankful for. And we all have our little truth. And for me, it does begin that the way out of this fallen state has been supplied for us. I wish and pray for each of you that some grace wherever you're at with your walk will come your way. And it's probably a good time for me to close out. Will, how are you doing? Do you want to any final thoughts?
I'm good. I'm feeling good about it.
Great. Will likes some quirky things. He likes to forage for food in central Kentucky, can identify all these crazy mushrooms, so he's prepared. He's got his own wood heater. This guy's prepared. So, okay. Again, what I'm going to do in the link is put my email. If anybody just wants to get a hold of me, and I'd like to start meeting more of you wherever you're at in your life. I have friends from Dr. Deep State of all different backgrounds, and so I just, if you've followed the site and you want to reach out and throw me a text, I'd be happy to hear anybody's story and do a meet and greet and get to know you. So I'm going to leave it at that. Next week, I am going to be on the road going up to Colorado as per usual. And so we'll try to do a podcast as soon as possible. So many parts of the book have to be still kind of pulled together. But hopefully sometime late spring, we will have some sort of manuscript ready for In Pursuit of the Metaverse. Millennial Dreams and Political Religion. And I think we've touched on a bit of that today. So again, for all you people out there, this has been Dr. Deep State and my good buddy Will, and we bid all of you a farewell for this week.
Bye, everybody. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, y'all.